Alright, today we are talking infantry and terrain. We get questions sometimes on how infantry interact with terrain. I've got a infantry squad and a Hittite, and they shall demonstrate for us. So we'll start with something simple. We'll use this tree. What does the tree do? Well, it's for our intents and purposes, we have designated this tree as light terrain. If you have a big thick tree and you want to designate it as medium, that's fine. But this is all stuff that we would kind of decide before the game starts. But let's just say for simplicity, we've already designated this tree as light cover. Um, the infantry could stand on the other side of it and get their plus 2d6 for defense. One thing to remember is the Hittite's flamethrower can't shoot through any type of cover when it's full cover. That being said, I wouldn't call this full cover, so the flamer can shoot at the infantry. Maybe if the infantry move behind this cover, all right, now the flamer can't quite see it, can't shoot through that tree. Although, I don't know. It's just when you get down and look at it from this view, you can probably see the infantry just fine and shoot at it with your flamethrower. But yeah, the infantry would get plus 2d6 for having cover. If they're really close to the cover, like so, they're kind of using it. So the tank in turn would not get its defense dive plus 1d6. If the infantry are back here, as long as it's kind of arguable situations, but basically the both would get the cover bonus. Next up, let's go over some area terrain. So first off, when we look at area terrain, I'm looking at this thing right here. So it has a border to it. This outline makes the terrain feature easier to read, so to say, or easier to judge, because then I can say when my infantry are inside this border, they're taking advantage of this area terrain. The highest point being the highest point of the terrain feature, which is this guy up here. So ideally, everybody in the silhouette of this area terrain is receiving that bonus. Something to know, because of the way this works, if I put my infantry right here, like so, yes, they're touching the area terrain, but that tank can draw a line of sight to the entirety of its silhouette. So this infantry should not get cover when they're out like this. So if we want them to have cover, all we got to do is back them up just a little, like so. We'll even do this, leave the lips sticking out. And of course the tank can do that same thing, but in order to get this edge over here, it would have to go through this zone right here, so technically the infantry have cover. And in return, the tank does not have cover. Even if I take the infantry and set them back here, as long as there is less than an inch between, or an inch or less, between the infantry and the border, then the infantry are considered to be using that edge in a sense. So they can shoot at the tank has no cover, the tank shoots back, the infantry do have their plus 2d6 cover. Let's go through some other buildings. Let's see, we've got this dilapidated structure over here. This is nice because you can actually place the infantry in here. Now, one thing to note about the way heavy gear rules are written, let's say that this building is a medium. We've designated it as a light because it's easily shot through. It's a very weak structure. But let's say it's medium and I can get them, maybe I can get the infantry in a location where the Hittite cannot see them. Well, therein lies a problem. If the infantry can move around and shoot at the tank inside the building, but the tank can't shoot at that, that kind of leaves a funny standard on a tabletop wargame. So that's why the rules for heavy gear have stated that you can shoot into the building no matter what for direct attacks against the infantry. Otherwise, you'd find yourself in positions where the infantry can fire on the tank, but the tank can't fire back. For example, this building is a great example of that. Um, Maybe you would consider these doors, maybe you don't. Either way, it makes a funny situation if I were to say that this infantry is inside this building and they're on, let's say, the first floor. They're standing right there. If you rule that you can't shoot at the infantry because there's no doors or windows, and it's medium, so you can't shoot through it. And maybe they go inside and they shut the door on the top. Now they're inside a feature where they can't be attacked, but also they can't really attack either. Again, this is just one of the reasons and rhymes to where the rules for terrain and buildings and stuff in heavy gear, the rule set, it's been made simple so that you don't end up in odd situations like this. So for example, according to the rules, I could place an infantry in here. Maybe I say they're right there, and then I put a die next to them saying what floor they're on, the second floor. And then I would allow vehicles to shoot in directly at the infantry. They would get their plus 2d6 bonus, and then they would fire out at the tank, and of course they're close to that wall there, so the tank's not going to get any defense. Otherwise, you end up in a weird situation where you've got some infantry in a location where they can't be shot, but they can't shoot either, which can get pretty gamey, because maybe the only reason you're doing that is to deny an assassinate target from being assassinated. Um, but either way, that being said, if you, as players, before you start the game, you look at a terrain feature like this, and you might designate certain things. Maybe the infantry can go inside it. It really depends on game or like how the game is set up. So one game may play differently. Another way you look at this feature is say infantry can't go inside. Maybe it's a fuel depot and it's full of fuel, or we'll say oil so it doesn't explode when it gets hit. But maybe they can just stand on the roof, and this small lip around the roof, we can say, yeah, that's infantry friendly lip, so they can use that lip as cover. And of course, you put a gear or something up here, maybe we could say that that lip is too small for the gear to use as cover. All kinds of different ways you can look at it. As long as you talk about these things before the game starts, you guys will do yourself a good service. Because even if you house rule something to be a little bit different than the actual rule set, as long as you both agree on it and it's fair, then it's fine. This building right here is a great example of, yeah, what do you do, right? There's not really doors on it. We're not even sure what to call it. We could call it a comms tower of some sort. You can't just place things on top of it. They tend to fall over. So I might do this. I might set it next to the terrain feature and then put a die next to it. And then ideally it's on this side, so it's on this location. If I ever want it to be in the center, I don't know, maybe I'll put a small die or something up there. And then of course I can use the die to designate what floor they're on. First floor, second floor, third floor. Um, Another example of an odd building is this one. Maybe you as the players decide that you can't go inside this building, but infantry can stand on top of it, or they can stand on the side of it. Um, this is another feature that would be kind of weird because you can't really place things on it or beside it without it falling over. So I might place it to the side, put a die next to it, designating what floor they're on. These things can sometimes be used as um, trenches, placed like so. Now, it's not a trench, it's elevated, but you might say, okay, this is not an elevated feature. This is something you discuss before the game. You say, hey, this is a trench. It is not elevated, or it's not elevated for the rules purposes. And infantry, when they're standing here, they can get inside it, etc., and use it as cover. And then you'd have to say, okay, can vehicles go in and out of this thing? Generally, trenches, you would say no. But yeah, it depends on the trench. You can also just use these things as barricades too. So maybe the infantry just sit on one side of it. They get their plus 2d6 cover, but anything comes around the side, it's no longer in that cover. The other thing you can do is designate it as area terrain, meaning this line right here, where I'll actually use a line. That line right there, or that line right there, is just considered a continuation of the area terrain border, meaning if you treat it as area terrain, no matter where the infantry are here, they're considered to be in this trench, and they get their plus 2d6 cover. That's another way to use it. You'll find on the DP9 store there's a couple trenches that we have that are very similar to this, where it's like when you put them on the table, it's elevated above the ground, but they're there to simulate trenches. On the other hand, if the other option is literally putting a hole in your table just to put it, yeah, just use something like this and say, okay, that's a trench. Other than that, we've got some rocks, water. Remember, infantry don't get cover from the water. The only people who get cover from the water are models with the sub trait for submersible. The rocks will work like normal. They stand behind the rocks. They gain cover. Tanks here. Technically, shouldn't be able to. Yeah. Oh, look at that. It's a perfect size rock. Uh, tank can't see them, but don't forget, tank can just come around the side too. Depends on how and where they are. Hope this helps.